Many are grieving the loss of an entire family in the River Oaks area after Houston police say a man fatally shot his 2 young children and wife before then killing himself.
The couple own 2 popular Montrose restaurants.
Jason Miles is live outside the family's home on Kingston Street after speaking with both friends and neighbors. Jason.
Hey there, guys. Yeah, around this time yesterday, police were stringing yellow crime scene tape across this street behind me after officers found 4 bodies inside that townhome.
2 teddy bears, some flowers, and a note now sit in the entryway to what was the home of a loving family from all outward appearances.
I mean, I guess this could go for a lot of people, but it always seemed like nothing was wrong.
Dining Out Houston managing editor Mega McSwain got to know 52-year-old Matthew and 39-year-old T. Mitchell and their children through the couple's popular restaurants in Montrose, Traveler's Table and Traveler's Cart, which remain open according to the company.
I'm T. Mitchell.
In fact, T recently collaborated with Dining Out on Instagram.
Anyone that has been in that restaurant, or even seen them from far away, or even followed them on social media is going to feel this loss.
Houston police say officers were called to the family's home for a wellness check around 5:30 Monday evening after getting concerned calls from a babysitter and relative. Police believe Mr. Mitchell fatally shot his wife and children, ages 4 and 8, before turning the gun on himself.
But I didn't feel like I could believe it until I heard it, that it was actually them. Because it's just so hard to believe.
We've seen a number of people drive or walk by the home this afternoon, including neighbors who wanted to leave these mementos.
Well, I personally know what it is to suffer a traumatic loss. And I can't imagine what the family is going through. And although we didn't know them personally, I just think the family needs to be loved on.
And some more friends came by just a short time ago. They were gathered here in the driveway. Some of them, you could hear them crying, a very emotional scene. Meantime, T. Mitchell's sister posted on Facebook just within the last few hours that this is a heartbreaking situation. As you might imagine, the family asking for privacy at this point. And I should tell you, according to court records at least, there have been no prior domestic or other issues at this address, at least nothing on the record. Reporting live from the River Oaks area, Jason Miles, KHOU 11 News.
Just an unthinkable loss for that family and a community now trying to make sense of it all. Jason Miles with a tragic story. Thank you.
In the heart of Houston, Texas, where the skyline is dominated by the shimmering glass of oil conglomerates and the neon glow of a world-class culinary scene, the name Mitchell was synonymous with the American dream. Thy Mitchell and Matthew Mitchell weren't just restaurateurs. They were icons of a lifestyle that everyone craved but few could attain. They were the king and queen of a global dining empire, moving effortlessly from the Michelin star atmosphere of Traveler's Table to the vibrant street food energy of Traveler's Cart. To their thousands of followers on social media, they were the power couple, the perfect blend of business acumen, creative genius, and familial bliss. Their children, Maya and Max, were the crowning jewels of this curated life, often seen laughing in sun-drenched photos or exploring the world through their parents' adventurous eyes. But on May 4th, 2026, the illusion didn't just crack. It shattered into a million jagged pieces. The silence of their River Oaks mansion was broken by the heavy boots of the Houston Police Department, uncovering a scene so grim, so calculated, and so fundamentally heartbreaking that it defied every headline that had ever been written about them. This wasn't just a sudden tragedy. It was the final act of a play that had been heading toward a dark conclusion for months. While the world stares at the floral tributes outside their restaurants in stunned silence, asking how this could happen to the perfect family, we are here to ask the deeper, more haunting question: why? Because when you look past the 5-star reviews and the high-fashion aesthetics of Thy's foreign fair brand, there were shadows. There were whispers in the corridors of their empire. There were flickers of darkness in the eyes of a man who felt the world closing in on him. Today, we are conducting a deep-dive investigation into the 7 hidden warning signs that everyone, from the elite critics to the casual observers, completely missed before the Mitchell tragedy became the darkest chapter in Houston's history. To understand the magnitude of this fall, we must first analyze the psychology of the public mask. In our modern era, success is no longer just about your bank account, it is about your brand. For the Mitchells, their brand was their life. There was no separation between the dining room of Traveler's Table and the living room of their home. Every smile was a marketing tool, every family vacation was a content opportunity. This creates a unique and deadly form of psychological pressure known as the performance trap. When your identity is tied to being a winner, the prospect of being a loser isn't just a business failure, it is a social death sentence. This brings us to the first hidden warning sign, the paradox of frantic expansion. In the 18 months leading up to the tragedy, the Mitchells were moving at a pace that was, in retrospect, unsustainable. They weren't just running a successful restaurant. They were trying to build a multi-platform legacy in the middle of one of the most volatile economic shifts in decades. While the public saw the grand opening of Traveler's Cart as a triumph, those deep within the hospitality industry saw a different story. The overhead costs in Houston's luxury districts like River Oaks and Montrose had skyrocketed. Labor shortages were gutting the margins of even the most popular spots. To keep the lights on and the success story alive, the Mitchells had to keep growing. It was a flight forward, a desperate attempt to outrun the financial shadows by creating more light, more buzz, and more debt. Insiders have begun to whisper about the tension behind the scenes during the launch of the street food concept. Matthew Mitchell was a strategist, a man who saw the world in terms of moves and countermoves. But he was also a man who likely realized that he was running out of board. The frantic pace of their growth wasn't a sign of health, it was a sign of a fever. The second sign was the legacy shift in their digital narrative. If you study the social media footprint of Mitchell in the final quarter of her life, you see a profound shift from future tense to legacy tense. That was a woman of the future, always talking about the next collection, the next menu, the next travel destination. But slowly, her posts began to anchor themselves in the past and the present innocence of her children. There was an intensity to the way she documented Maya and Max, a sort of desperate archiving that suggested she felt time was slipping away. In the world of behavioral forensics, when a high achiever stops looking at the horizon and starts obsessively documenting the now, it often indicates an internal realization that the horizon is no longer there. While her followers saw beautiful family moments, what they were actually witnessing was a mother trying to freeze time before the storm hit. Meanwhile, Matthew Mitchell was undergoing a different kind of transformation. He was the ghost in the machine, the silent partner who had once been the backbone of their public identity, but was now retreating into an impenetrable silence. This is the third hidden sign, the withdrawal of the protector. In a domestic unit built on shared success, the withdrawal of one partner is a siren song for disaster. Matthew had always prided himself on being the visionary who provided the safety net for Thice's creativity. But as the pressures of the empire grew, the net began to tear. Friends and associates noticed that Matthew was no longer the fixer he used to be. He was becoming uncharacteristically cynical, withdrawn, and sharp. In the high-pressure world of five-star dining, burnout is common, but this was something deeper. This was the isolation of a man who felt that the provider mask he had worn for decades was finally fusing to his face, suffocating him. He was surrounded by people, employees, fans, socialites, but he was utterly alone in his despair. As we move deeper into the mechanics of this collapse, we hit the fourth hidden sign, the shadow financial collapse and the luxury trap. In Houston's elite circles, there is a phenomenon known as asset-rich, cash-poor. To the patrons of Traveler's Table, the business looked like a gold mine. The tables were always full, the cocktails were flowing, and the wait list was weeks long. But what the public doesn't see are the back-of-house economics. By early 2026, the cost of global spices, imported meats, and premium labor had created a situation where even a full house could be a losing game. Matthew Mitchell was a man of pride. For him, the idea of downscaling, moving out of River Oaks, or heaven forbid, filing for bankruptcy was not an option. It was a total annihilation of his ego. We see this in the luxury trap, where high-profile individuals feel forced to maintain a lifestyle they can no longer afford just to keep the investors and the public from smelling blood in the water. The warning sign here was the frantic pace of one-night-only events and high-ticket promotions. When a luxury brand starts acting like a discount hustle, it's because the cash flow has dried up. Matthew wasn't just managing a restaurant, he was managing a mirage. The pressure of pretending to be a millionaire while struggling to meet a massive commercial payroll is a specific kind of torture that leads to executive burnout, which in Matthew's case, likely evolved into something far more predatory. He began to see his family not as people to be loved, but as a legacy that had to be preserved from the stain of poverty. In his warped narcissistic logic, it was better for them to die as the successful Mitchells than to live as the bankrupt Mitchells. This leads us to the fifth and perhaps most disturbing warning sign, the enmeshment and the erasure of boundaries. In the months leading up to May 4th, the Mitchell family unit became strangely insular. Mitchell, who was once the social butterfly of the Houston charity circuit, began to decline invitations. The children Maya and Max, were seen less frequently at their usual weekend spots. This is a classic precursor to domestic tragedies, the closing of the circle. When a patriarch or a couple begins to withdraw their family from the support systems of friends, nannies, and extended relatives, they are creating a vacuum. In this vacuum, the father's reality becomes the only reality. If Matthew was spiraling into a dark, paranoid, or depressive state, there was no one left in the inner circle to provide a reality check. Vi, caught in the middle of her own professional whirlwind, may have been gaslit into believing that they just needed privacy to get through a rough patch. But in the world of family annihilation, privacy is the predator's greatest tool. The warning sign was the silence. The house in River Oaks, once a hub of creativity and networking, had become a fortress of secrets. The sixth sign was the finality of the creative output. If we look at Thi's clothing brand, Foreign Fair, her final designs and marketing copy took on a hauntingly ethereal tone. She spoke of the ultimate journey and finding peace in the unknown. While fashion marketing is often flowery, there was a weight to her words that felt like a goodbye. Simultaneously, Matthew's creative input at the restaurants stopped entirely. He was no longer innovating, he was merely existing. When a creator stops creating, it's because they no longer believe in a future where their creation exists. This brings us to the seventh and final warning sign, the calm before the storm. In the 72 hours before the police discovered the bodies, those who interacted with Matthew Mitchell described him as uncharacteristically calm. This is the most dangerous sign of all. In psychology, this is known as the resolution effect. Once a person has made the definitive decision to commit a violent act or end their life, the internal struggle ends. The anxiety disappears because the solution has been found. Matthew wasn't stressed anymore because, in his mind, the plan was set. He had decided that on May 4th, the Mitchell brand would end on his terms. He went through the motions, the school drop-offs, the business emails, with the chilling precision of a man who was already a ghost. The tragedy of the Mitchells is a mirror held up to our society's obsession with the hustle. We cheered for their growth, we liked their photos, and we celebrated their expansion, never once stopping to ask if the human beings behind the brand were actually okay. We ignored the signs because we wanted the story to be true. We wanted to believe that you could have it all without losing your soul. But the River Oaks crime scene tells a different story. It tells the story of a man who couldn't separate his worth from his bank account, and a woman who was so busy building a legacy that she didn't see the architect was tearing down the walls from the inside. As the investigation continues to pull records from their private servers and financial accounts, the picture only gets darker. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a cold, calculated business decision made by a man who saw his family as assets to be liquidated rather than lives to be lived. The traveler has reached the end of the road, and the road ended in a cul-de-sac of pride, debt, and devastating violence. This brings us to the deeper, more structural layer of the Mitchell tragedy, the ecology of the Houston elite and the status quo trap. To understand the sheer weight of the pressure Matthew and Thi were under, we have to look at the geographical theater of their lives, River Oaks. In Houston, River Oaks isn't just a neighborhood, it's a scoreboard. It's an environment where your worth is measured by the length of your guest list and the exclusivity of your wine cellar. The eighth hidden sign, which permeated their entire final year, was the financial mimicry. The Mitchells were living in a social circle populated by old money oil tycoons and multi-generational wealth. But the Mitchells were new money. Their wealth was tied to the volatile day-to-day operations of the hospitality industry. While their neighbors could weather a market downturn with their diversified portfolios, the Mitchells' entire lifestyle was dependent on the number of appetizers sold on a Tuesday night. The warning sign was their attempt to match the spending habits of the ultra-wealthy. The private jets, the high-end galas, and the luxury brand sponsorships were not just perks of the job. They were overhead costs for a brand that was increasingly built on a foundation of sand. Matthew Mitchell wasn't just a restaurateur. He was a social climber who had reached the peak and realized he didn't have the gear to stay there. The oxygen was running out, and instead of descending gracefully, he decided to cut the rope. The ninth sign involves the corporate gaslighting that occurs within high-level family businesses. In the months before the tragedy, employees at the corporate level of the Mitchell Group, the holding company for Travelers Table, began to notice a shift in how information was shared. Matthew began to centralize control. He moved away from the transparent, collaborative style that had built the company and started making unilateral decisions. This is often a sign of a leader who is trying to hide a catastrophic mistake. Whether it was a bad investment, a massive tax liability, or a predatory loan taken out to save the clothing brand, Matthew was building a wall of secrecy. He was gaslighting his own team, and potentially thy herself, into believing that the slight dip in revenue was just a seasonal trend. This internal secrecy created a vacuum of accountability. In a healthy company, someone would have flagged the financial red flags. In the Mitchell Group, Matthew's word was law, and that law was becoming increasingly divorced from reality. This leads us to the 10th and perhaps most tragic sign, the golden child syndrome and the pressure on Maya and Max. While the world saw the Mitchell children as the luckiest kids in Houston, the reality of being a brand child is a unique form of stress. Maya and Max weren't just children, they were symbols of the Mitchells' genetic and social success. In the final months, there was an intensified focus on their perfection. The social media posts became more frequent but less authentic. Every photo of Maya at ballet or Max in the garden felt staged to provide a distraction from the growing tension in the house. This weaponized innocence is a classic strategy used by families in crisis. They use the children as a shield against criticism. If the kids look happy, the family must be okay. But neighbors have since recalled seeing a different side. The quiet, somber faces of children who were picking up on the vibrations of a household that was nearing a breaking point. Children are barometers for parental stress, and the Mitchell children were showing signs of emotional guarding that the public chose to ignore in favor of the pretty pictures. As we move toward the final psychological profile of the perpetrator, we must address the gilded cage phenomenon. Thy Mitchell was a powerhouse in her own right, but she was operating within a patriarchal structure that Matthew had meticulously built. To the public, she was an equal partner. In reality, Matthew held the keys to the kingdom. He controlled the finances, the legal structures, and the ultimate direction of the brand. The 11th sign was thy subtle attempt to diversify herself. Her clothing brand, Foreign Fair, was her attempt to create something that was entirely hers, something that Matthew couldn't touch. But in the world of a family annihilator, independence is seen as a threat. If thy succeeded outside of the Mitchell brand, she might realize she didn't need Matthew. If she didn't need Matthew, she might leave. And if she left, the perfect image would be destroyed. For a narcissist like Matthew, a divorce isn't just a legal separation, it's a public execution of their ego. He couldn't allow the world to see the traveler as a man who couldn't even keep his own wife. The investigation has now begun to look into digital footprints of despair. Computer forensics are expected to reveal a history of searches related to financial ruin, insurance policies, and perhaps even the logistics of the crime itself. This brings us to the 12th sign, the planning phase silence. In the weeks leading up to May 4th, Matthew Mitchell's communication with the outside world became purely transactional. He stopped engaging in the small talk of the Houston elite. He was no longer a participant in his own life, he was an observer. He was a man who had already checked out of the hotel and was just waiting for the car to arrive. This script is not just a retelling of a crime, it is an autopsy of the American dream gone wrong. It is a warning to every entrepreneur, every influencer, and every power couple that the image you project to the world is not worth the soul you lose in the process. The Mitchells had everything the world says you should want, and yet, in the end, it wasn't enough to save them from the darkness that pride and debt can create. As the sun sets over the quiet streets of River Oaks, the house on the corner remains a silent monument to the fact that perfection is a dangerous lie. The investigation into the final days of the Mitchell family brings us to the most uncomfortable realization of all, the societal complicity in the creation of their tragedy. We, the audience, the diners, and the followers, were the 13 hidden sign. We demanded the perfection that Matthew Mitchell eventually died to protect. In the final chapter of this deep dive, we look at the legacy of the fallen empire and the haunting echoes left in the Houston streets. The 14th sign was the symmetry of the end. Investigators noted that the crime scene was not chaotic. It was orderly. This is a terrifying hallmark of a family annihilator who views their actions not as a murder, but as a mercy. In Matthew's warped psychological state, he wasn't destroying his children, he was saving them from the humiliation of the coming collapse. This level of order suggests that the planning phase lasted for weeks, if not months. It means that while he was shaking hands with patrons at Traveler's Cart and discussing menu prices with his managers, he was simultaneously calculating the trajectory of his final act. This dual-track existence, living a normal life while meticulously planning its destruction, is the ultimate warning sign that is almost impossible to detect until the curtain falls. As the community grapples with the loss, we must address the algorithm of despair. In our digital age, the Mitchells were incentivized to hide their pain. The YouTube and Instagram algorithms do not reward vulnerability. They reward success, growth, and aesthetic beauty. The Mitchell was a victim not just of her husband's violence, but of a culture that told her she had to be a girl boss and a super mom simultaneously, without ever showing a crack in the porcelain. The 15th sign was the toxic positivity that permeated her final public interactions. When someone is constantly insisting that everything is blessed and amazing despite clear economic and professional headwinds, they are often in a state of high-functioning dissociation. They have detached from their own reality to satisfy the expectations of their audience. Final 60 days, Matthew had reportedly become obsessed with loyalty. He was testing his employees, looking for leaks, and becoming increasingly paranoid about his competitors. This paranoia is a common trait in those who are about to commit an act of mass domestic violence. They begin to see the world as a predatory place, and they convince themselves that their family is only safe if they are removed from the board entirely. The traveler had seen too much of the dark side of the world, and he allowed that darkness to consume his home. The aftermath in Houston has been a mixture of candlelight vigils and cold, hard reality. The restaurants, once symbols of global unity and culinary exploration, now stand as monuments to a private war. The final warning sign, the 17th, was the erasure of self. In the weeks before May 4th, the Mitchell had begun to give away her personal belongings. Friends thought she was just decluttering for a move or a new season. In reality, it was a classic sign of pre-suicidal shadowing, where a person begins to detach from their material life. Whether she knew what was coming or was simply overwhelmed by her own internal battle remains a subject of intense debate among those who knew her. The tragedy of Thy, Matthew, Maya, and Max Mitchell is a story that defies simple explanation. It is a complex tapestry of financial pressure, narcissistic pride, societal expectations, and the dark side of the American dream. As the city of Houston moves forward, the Mitchell signs serve as a grim checklist for the modern era. We must learn to look past the brand. We must learn to value the human over the headline. And we must recognize that the most expensive homes often hide the most expensive secrets. The traveler's journey has ended, but the questions it leaves behind will resonate for decades. Was it the debt? Was it the ego? Or was it the simple, terrifying fact that we never truly know the person sitting across the table from us? As the candles burn out in front of Traveler's table, the silence that remains is a call to action. To be kinder, to be more observant, and to realize that no amount of success is worth the price of a human life. The story of the Mitchells is over, but for those who are still running the race, the warning signs are now written in blood on the walls of a River Oaks mansion. We ignore them at our own peril. In the end, the Mitchell tragedy wasn't just about a family that died, it was about a dream that was never real. It was an empire built on the shifting sands of public perception, and when the tide came in, there was nothing left but the wreckage of a life that looked perfect from every angle except the one that mattered most. The investigation may close its files, the police may move on to the next case, and the restaurants may eventually find new owners, but the ghost of the Mitchell family will forever haunt the Houston culinary scene. A reminder that the most dangerous journey a traveler can take is the one they take alone, into the darkness of their own mind.